Please leave a comment where you are watching from. This is my dad's story. After he was done in Vietnam, he soon stationed at an Air Force base in Greenland. They had bad blizzards often there, and when they came through the base shut down, and every section of the barracks would take roll call. These blizzards are intense. There were cables running between all the buildings you attached to your person with a carabiner, so if there was a sudden whiteout you didn't get lost and die. They had people die literally 20 meters from shelter because they got lost in bad weather and froze. He said for about 5 months, every time they locked down for weather they would hear horrendous screaming outside. Everyone was accounted for, so they didn't risk sending anyone out to investigate. They wrote it off as an animal. However, every time this was heard, the engine room would be wrecked. Tools everywhere, paperwork all over the floor, tables and toolboxes knocked over. Even one time a several thousand-pound jet engine had been lifted from its workbench crane thing and smashed almost 30 feet away. The hangars and engine room had cameras covering every single possible entrance with spotlights that made them clear even in a whiteout. No animals, no people, no anything was ever seen entering or leaving those buildings. Then one day it just stopped. Edit. Okay, since I have a lot of debate on what could have caused this, I will clear some stuff up. This was not something they just shrugged at. It cost a lot of money and threw a wrench in at least one surveillance routine, which caused a lot of brass from the DoD and the CIA to breath fire down the base commander's neck. This facility, beyond military function, served as a base for a lot of civilian research as well. There was a full investigation using all manner of scientists, engineers, and specialists. They came up with no satisfactory explanation for what was happening. I do not believe in the paranormal, nor did my father. This is the only spooky type story he has from 22 years in the service. No one knows what happened. It was very strange in every way. Hundreds of people wrote reports and documented this. It wasn't just some grease monkeys scratching their heads and randomly guessing. That said, I spoke to my mom. She told me a couple things I missed. After one of these occasions, the U-2 in the shop had all its electronics turned on. Many of the systems in this plane were special built for this airframe and this particular crew's mission. These systems were complex and archaic. Very few people knew how to operate this machinery, and the only ones on base that could were 2 engineers and its crew. It wasn't a simple matter of hitting power buttons and flipping switches from off to on. Another time 3 barrels of hydraulic fluid vanished and were never found. They doubted the screaming noise was wind because it came in short, irregular bursts, and winds never produced those sounds again. They theorized it was a polar bear, but if it was, its coincidental timing was extremely uncanny. Lastly, control picked up a bunch of weird interference and anomalous readings that, again, had the uncanny timing of happening only when this was going on. They were never able to reproduce these errors in a controlled manner. Thank you guys for reading. Okay, since I am still getting a stream of people saying I believe this was something supernatural or aliens or something. No. What I am saying is that the best possible explanation is a series of many unrelated, unlikely, and unreproducible events came together in an also unlikely manner that left no satisfactory explanation for what was going on. The screaming was thought to be a polar bear or something. The radar glitches were thought to be due to moisture, but left no obvious signs. The barrels were most likely the result of an inventory error, etc., etc., etc. However, even with this all in mind, the chances of all these events coming together in this manner, by sheer coincidence, is astronomical. So no one was willing to say anything with certainty, thus no satisfactory answer, and writing it off as an act of God. It's creepy, it's bizarre, but it's not supernatural, and the answer isn't simply it's the wind. For more info, see my replies to others about the construction of the place, the cameras, etc. Another story I have heard from a friend about his father. He served in the Taiwanese Marines as a drill sergeant. Much of the ground in Taiwan saw violence under occupation, and it was rumored his base was built on or near a mass grave. Needless to say, he's had a few paranormal stories. He had a guy report to him in the morning exhausted but frazzled. The night before, he had been on guard duty, overlooking the firing range. The targets on the range were a mix of clay and wood figures, cut and drawn to look like an enemy soldier aiming a rifle at you. According to the guard, when he'd been bored out of his mind staring out over the range, he saw clear as day one of the clay soldiers wearily lay down his rifle and exclaim, "Damn, I'm tired." The guard said he passed out from fright. During the evening, when training was over, the sergeants for the most part had the time to themselves. My dad liked to go snake hunting during dusk, when the heat was rising from the ground, and the snakes came out of their holes. So one evening he sets out, carrying a bag, a nice long stick, and a flashlight. As he was making his way across the field, zigzagging in a search pattern, he found himself getting closer and closer to an old, decrepit outhouse that had been abandoned as it was too far from the main base. As he got within a few yards of it, he was hit with a sudden feeling of apprehension. Something told him going near the outhouse was a bad idea. At that moment, his flashlight, aimed right at the construct, went out. He fiddled with the battery, smacked it, thought, fuck, better get a new battery, and turned around to head back. The moment he turned and faced the main base, the flashlight flickered back on. Great, time to keep hunting. The moment he turned to face the outhouse, it flickered off again. Face the base, it flickered on. He did this 2 or 3 times, got the message, verbally apologized for intruding, turned and walked calmly back to base. The base itself was surrounded by forest and mountains, the natural terrain of Taiwan. One day a soldier was reported missing. As the day went on, it was clear that he'd either deserted or was in serious trouble. A manhunt/rescue team was organized and most of the base was out searching for the guy as the rain started to come in. As night fell they called it off and got ready to try again tomorrow. They found him in the morning, huddled in a wet, dark cave, scared, speechless, and out of his mind. No one was sure what he saw to cause him to freak out, and they never found out. They shipped the guy out soon afterwards. Finally, one of his years on the base, it was hit with a huge typhoon. Typhoons are pretty regular in Taiwan, especially during the summer, but this one was going to set records. Everyone hunkered down and reinforced the base as best they could, and it held well, and after days of relentless rain and wind, they emerged to survey the damage. One of the trees on base had been hundreds of years old. It sat on a hill and overlooked the base, and so had been the site of a Buddhist shrine set at its roots. Now the roots twisted and turned into the air. The storm had torn the tree from the ground. And yet, the shrine itself was untouched. Even the red silk covering, with nothing weighing it down, hadn't moved an inch despite the winds that had finally torn the great tree from its hill after hundreds of years. The soldiers took this as a sign that despite whatever would be thrown against them, their spirit would remain strong and unmoved. The Marine Corps teaches you to be somewhat unshakable, to hold your ground, to face fear head-on and push through it, no matter what the cost may be. And I'd like to think I embodied that ethos during my service. But that night, out there in the cemetery, something cracked very deep inside me. Something I can't entirely explain, not to anyone. I often volunteered for graveyard shifts. I liked the solitude, the quiet hum of the world at rest. At the Beirut bombing memorial, there was something sacred about the stillness, even if it was occasionally broken by the distant rustle of branches or the eerily melodic calls of night birds. The veterans' cemetery, though, well, that was a different kind of quiet altogether. It was the kind of silence that pressed in on you, heavy and expectant, like the air before a thunderstorm. And yet, it never felt threatening. Not until that night. I still remember how the air felt as I stepped closer to the perimeter fence. The humidity of the woods clung to my skin, and the faint scent of pine and damp earth lingered in the air. My boots crunched softly against the gravel path as I walked my usual route, flashlight in hand, scanning the tree line. I was nearing the oldest section of the cemetery, where the headstones were weathered and tilted, some half swallowed by ivy and creeping moss. It was easy to forget that these graves existed. They were tucked away in a far corner, neglected, their inscriptions fading into illegibility with each passing year. That's when I heard it. The humming. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, a lilting melody that seemed to drift on the wind. I froze, straining to listen, unsure if I was imagining it. But no, it was there, just beyond the edge of hearing. It wasn't the kind of tune you'd expect to hear in the dead of night, either. It wasn't some drunk wanderer or a stray hiker. No, this was something else. The melody was haunting, beautiful, and otherworldly, and it sent an involuntary shiver racing down my spine. I turned slowly, shining my flashlight toward the sound. It seemed to be coming from deeper within the trees, right near the fence line. My pulse quickened, but I pressed forward, curiosity and duty overriding the creeping unease that had taken root in my chest. As I moved closer, the humming grew louder, and I noticed something strange, something I couldn't explain. The air around me felt charged, like the atmosphere before a lightning strike. My skin prickled, and the hairs on my arms and neck stood to attention. I could feel it, buzzing faintly beneath my skin, a static hum that matched the melody in perfect synchronization. Then I saw the light. It was faint at first, a soft blue glow that flickered and pulsed like a heartbeat. It filtered through the thick tangle of vines and brush that clung to an old oak tree near the fence. I hesitated, every instinct in my body screaming at me to turn back, to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever was waiting in the shadows. But I didn't. Maybe it was arrogance. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Or maybe it was sheer stupidity. Either way, I pushed forward, brushing aside the undergrowth with trembling hands. What I saw stopped me dead in my tracks. The headstone was ancient, its edges worn smooth by decades, maybe centuries, of exposure to the elements. The marble was cracked and faded, the inscription long eroded into obscurity. But the cross that was etched into the stone was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It glowed with an intensity that seemed impossible, a vivid, electric blue that cast strange, shifting shadows across the surrounding trees. It wasn't just glowing, it was alive. The light pulsed and shimmered, as though something within the stone itself was breathing, stirring, waiting. The humming was deafening now, though it no longer sounded like a single voice. It was a chorus, 100 voices, maybe more, woven together in perfect harmony. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. The sound was too layered, too intricate, too alien. The vibrations coursed through me, filling my chest with a strange warmth that was equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I could only stare, transfixed, as the light grew brighter and the melody swelled, filling the night with its haunting beauty. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light flickered and dimmed. The humming faded into silence, leaving only the rustle of leaves and the distant chirp of crickets. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as though whatever presence had been there only moments ago had left an indelible mark on the world around it. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest, and that's when the fear finally hit me. I ran. I ran like hell, my flashlight swinging wildly as I tore through the trees, not caring about the noise, not caring about anything except putting as much distance as possible between myself and that headstone. By the time I reached the parking lot, I was gasping for air, my entire body trembling with adrenaline. I barely managed to radio the next guard on duty, my words tumbling out in a frantic, incoherent mess. He must have thought I'd lost my mind, but to his credit, he didn't ask questions. He just showed up, and I spent the rest of my shift in the cab of his truck, staring out into the darkness and praying I wouldn't see that blue light again. For days afterward, I couldn't shake the memory of what I'd seen. It haunted me, gnawed at the edges of my thoughts, refusing to be dismissed as a trick of the light or a figment of my imagination. I couldn't ignore it. So against my better judgment, I returned to the grave in the harsh light of day, hoping to find some rational explanation for what had happened. The headstone was still there, nestled beneath the gnarled branches of the old oak. But in the daylight, it was unremarkable, a plain, weathered slab of marble, its cross no longer glowing, its surface cold and lifeless beneath my fingers. I searched every inch of it, looking for hidden wires, LEDs, anything that could explain the strange phenomenon I'd witnessed. But there was nothing. Just stone. Solid, ordinary stone. I left the cemetery that day with more questions than answers. I resumed my graveyard patrols, wary but determined not to let fear get the better of me. And for the most part, life returned to normal. I never saw the light again, never heard the humming again. But I couldn't forget it. I couldn't forget the way it had made me feel. The awe, the terror, the strange, unshakable certainty that I had glimpsed something beyond human comprehension. I don't know what it was. A spirit? A ghost? Something older, deeper, more primal? I may never know. Fort Carson, during Warhorse Strike 2015. It was the last day of a 2-week field problem. We were all packed out and ready to go home, but couldn't do so until the next day because our good friends in the Arty Battery lost a pair of C in the dark flavor MREs. Naturally, we were all out of dip/smoke/caffeine, and from our location could see our barracks near the helicopter field. One of our, I'm retiring this year, fuck all of this, E8 types who was fiending for some nicotine arranged a night patrol. We would do a nighttime tactical movement to Gate 20, where we would secure a target of opportunity in the form of his wife slinging a few logs of Cutter's Choice, some Great Value Edition Red Bulls, and a couple cartons of shitty Pall Malls or something as equally cheap over the gate for us to recover, and be back before sunrise. Off we marched, fueled by addiction and boredom. For those at Carson, I believe it was TA7, along the road just beyond the north ridge of the impact zone running east-west. Now this training area was our backyard. We did ruck marches and familiar exercises here almost weekly in the night, day, and every time in between. We were not sleep-deprived as we were just waiting for Artie to unfuck their lives, and by all means this should have been across the valley and get on the parallel trail kind of op. In the bed of this valley there is a stream. It was early fall, and it was largely dry. So sound carried and smell was dampened. The night was crystal clear, slim waning crescent of a moon in pretty limited illumination. But hey, we had looky-darkies on. The very moment we cross this stream, we are hit by the most repugnant smell. Not a skunk or a wild unwashed animal, but the kind of smell that is only associated with meat gone bad. It's not uncommon to find dead deer and the like out here, but we'd been training in the area all week. There was nothing here the entire time, and this is the kind of smell, so you wouldn't have missed had you tried. Like some advanced decomposition shit. We wanted our drugs, so we pushed on writing it off as a dead animal. The forest surrounding the stream was about 200 meters across, only taking us a few minutes to pass through. Myself, being the other NCO in this party, was at the rear of the train to make sure nobody got lost in the dark. So I've been followed before. I hunt and enjoy being alone. When you get that gut feeling that something is watching you, there is no logical explanation. The trees obscured our vision to the rest of the unit, and I was at the rear of the party. When I look back, there are a pair of gleaming eyes in my night vision, no more than 10 meters away. Unfortunate part, we had no live ammo. Although I would not have wanted to explain that to the O-types. Equally unfortunate part, we had places to be, so we could not investigate. Bet your ass I hurried the fuck on out of there and scaled the other side of that valley. We also took the long way home, so as to enjoy our spoils in relative privacy. Another story here. Back in 2012 I was lucky enough to be a private in the army in Afghanistan. I won't bore you with details, but I meddled with the radios on a small team in a pretty remote area on a combat outpost. We conducted 24-hour operations, and one night, we get this very weird transmission. It came in pretty strong, and we couldn't determine from what direction it was coming in. However, what truly made it odd was what was being said. Now, I'm no linguist, but I know enough about different languages to know this wasn't Pashtun or Dari, or even English for that matter. It was straight-up Russian. This is when red flags start going up, and we begin to make phone calls to our operations center and begin to wake people up. We had a recording device and managed to catch most of the broadcast before it stopped completely. We didn't have any Russian linguists with us. We had no idea what was going on. We sent a copy of the recording over high side to get information translated. I knew one of the warrant officers in my unit was also a Russian linguist back from the Cold War era and had him have a listen as well. He was rusty but got the general gist of the message. It was a distress call asking for help, that their base was being overrun and being attacked. This was even more confusing, as there hasn't been a Russian base in AF since their occupation. We schemed a lot over what caused it. He said maybe it was a pre-recorded beacon that may have just randomly gone off after all these years, who knows. The only thing that bothered me with that explanation was that the whole thing didn't sound like a pre-recorded audio. There was an obvious level of distress in their voice, albeit there was no background noise to it. I got a few. I grew up in an old Victorian-era boarding house in Iva, South Carolina. Everything about that town, that house and its surrounding area is just bug creepy. We saw and felt all kinds of weirdness in there, but that's only the beginning of my experiences. Hot spots, cold spots, apparitions of a man who looked like he was dressed in a suit and fedora, who was always with a young woman who was wearing a dress, like an old schoolteacher from when the house was used as a boarding house, and the ghosts of people that had been lynched from an old pecan tree in my backyard. I'm used to seeing some fucked up shit by this point, and that's only part of it. Fast forward to 2014. Enlisted in the U.S. Navy, got assigned TAD to USS Sterett in between my A and C schools. I was coming back to the ship one night, and I see somebody aloft. That's not right. Nobody's supposed to be aloft at night, but somebody probably got an okay for it somewhere, so whatever. I see them walking around. Then I get to the brow and look up, but don't see anybody. Guess they went inside already. Didn't think anything about it. The next morning, we go underway. I went up to the smoke deck late one night on that underway, and on my way there, I see the upper half of a guy's face and could see coveralls with his second-class crows visible through the porthole window on one of the airlock doors that you go through to go outside. I make eye contact and shuffle over to let him in. He shuffled over too. Okay, I'll open it, guy, whatever. I open it, look around and don't see him. He probably went over for another cigarette. I climb up there and I see some people in the dark, faces occasionally lit by the cherry from their cigarette, but I don't see the guy. I ask if anybody saw somebody come up here, because there was a guy that was about to hop through the airlock, but didn't. I just want to make sure that he's okay, you know? Silence. Then, you saw him, huh? Yeah, dipshit, that's why I asked. Is that guy up here or what? Do we need to call away man overboard? No, he's dead. Maybe not if we turn the fuck around. No, I mean he hung himself. Really? No shit. Yeah. He was a CTR2 that got into a love triangle that went bad. He couldn't deal, so hey, actually come over here under this light. Okay. Look up. This light was what he hung himself from. Sometimes you can see him walking around up there at night, and you'll feel a cold spot right here. F me. Anything else I ought to know? Yeah, let me show you Andrew Starrett's sword. It'll always shock you through the case, no matter how many times you touch it, or if you touch some metal beforehand. Fucking cool, dude. Yeah, apparently he killed a kid with it, or something. Yeesh. Oh, and you're a sonar tech, right? Yeah, man. I'm in RDIV right now, but yeah. Okay, go ask Chief Moon about the skid. I think she's in sonar right now anyway. Okay, I'll bite. I head back in, and get down to sonar control. Chief Moon was there, and I ask her about the skid. Oh hell nah. That place freaks me the crap out. Okay, but why? What's the story? I gotta know now. Well, I went down there one time to get pressure readings because I was an STG-1 at the time, and I was on duty. I saw a guy standing in the corner, back facing the ladder. I asked if he was okay, and he didn't reply, so I booked. F that shit. I don't ever go down there at night. Yeah, but was it just somebody fucking with you? It sure as shit wasn't anybody that I recognized at all, so you tell me. Ooh, probably not. Yeah, and that's why I stay the fuck out of there. I left after a bit, and figured that I'd check up on the skid anyway, just to see for myself. I got down there, and when I touched the hatch, I felt the same weirdness from when I was a kid. I went in anyway, cut on a light and didn't see anything, but still felt that something was off. Everybody else that I asked said that it's creepy down there, and that they don't go anywhere near the skid unless they really have to. Anyway, that's a few things that I saw out there. My old ship, USS Princeton, chased a UFO one time, off the coast of Baja, and I saw some sort of submerged disc-like thing on sonar once. That, and any time that we'd go over shipwrecks, I would get a weird feeling out on the smoke deck. Anyway, that's enough for now. I gotta get back to work. Thanks, peeps. Another to add before I forget. When I was in eastern Afghanistan, Tangi Valley, Syedabad, Jighetto, and everything between Kabul and Ghazni, I saw lights dancing around the sky. Now, I am a huge nerd and wanted to be a pilot. To put this into context, my reading was usually Human Factors in Aviation, or I'd be rereading A Brief History of Time, so I was often looked at as the guy too smart to be enlisted. Just wanted yo put that out there to say I'm not dumb or easily impressionable, and I also know a thing or two about fixed-wing aviation, and have been around enough helicopters in combat to understand their maneuverability. So anyway, during a few different missions I saw lights in the sky that would defy the laws of aerodynamics. It was an incredible display. Left, right, up, down, zigzag, sometimes super fast and sometimes stopping in midair. We were dug into the peak of a mountain, some of the highest in Afghanistan, so I had a crystal clear view of the sky. It was unlike any NATO bird I'm aware of and displayed capabilities beyond what we have deployed were capable of. So, let's get another thing out of the way. My cop was at around 10k elevation. When I first got there, it hurt to breathe, let alone run around with 200 plus lbs on your back. You literally aren't allowed to leave the wire for 2 weeks just to get acclimated to the thin air. So we regularly went on missions that would take us to mountains, so high our Chinooks had to drop us off at a lower point because they can't go that high. I'm pretty familiar with how our aviation fleet engages targets and sets up flight paths for gun runs. This thing, whatever it was, did not follow any recognizable patterns whatsoever, and would go so high it was getting lost amongst the stars, and it would zoom at the ground like it's going kamikaze. I had a buddy who was wounded and stuck in the TOC, so he was there on the radio, and can confirm we didn't have any birds in the air. I woke up my buddy next to me to see what I was seeing, and he too was amazed and couldn't understand, though he brushed it off to whatever badass new army tech is being used. So the only things I admittedly have very little knowledge about are drones, but Eve actually seen a few videos on drones, and they seem to be unable to pull off what I witnessed the lights doing. Lastly, at larger outposts there's a surveillance contraption that we set up, literally lying to the villagers and tell them it's a weather balloon lols. But I've seen that thing up close. It's basically a blimp, and it's even tethered to the outpost, so it's literal key just like hovering, not going anywhere, keeping eyes on the surrounding area. So it couldn't be that either. To this day, I have no clue what it could have been. I saw it on 3 different occasions, 2 of which while on a mountain top, another while at an outpost. At the end of the day, I can't pretend I know what every military element in Afghanistan is up, but when my dude at the TOC says no one called in air support, my buddy dug in next to me confirms I'm not just seeing shit, and he sees it too, and my pretty well-rounded education can't make sense of it. I know it's worth my curiosity. I was not military, but I think this story kinda qualifies. I was a camp counselor for a summer camp outside of Boston, Massachusetts 1 year. Our camp took a field trip to George's Island on Boston Harbor to visit old Fort Warren. Ft. Warren was primarily used as a Confederate prison during the Civil War. Anywho, this place has loads of dark and damp corridors and just filled with creepy vibes. I loved it. It was a hot and sunny July day, and our tour guide took us down through a passage that was completely and utterly pitch black. These conditions lasted for maybe 100 feet or so. My group was too young to be left unsupervised, so we had to basically tie them together and follow single file against the granite wall. The National Park Rangers who were giving the tour were playing jokes on the kids and scaring them throughout. Light-hearted jokes, nothing too WTF. Our kids were spooked but really enjoyed it. Now comes the good shit. I was 15, so I was a junior counselor. JR's got all the grunt work of summer camp life, haha. So my senior counselor says to go back through the pass and get the next group, a group of older kids, and tell them to come through, since our little ones were clear. I was not really digging that idea, but I had no choice. So I began to briskly walk down the black corridor. You had to take a corner at both ends to exit this stretch, so for most of the corridor, you are in complete darkness. I could finally see the faint glow of the daylight at the far end, and right when I felt relived, a person crossed the light from right to left very quickly. It was a smaller outline of a person, so I instantly thought it was an older kid from our camp. Hey, who is that? Group 7 or 8? No answer. No sound of walking, nothing. The creepy part is that the way the shadow moved to the left would put them right up against the granite wall. So I got instantly sketched out that someone was about to scare the shit out of me. So I veered further right of the corridor to avoid this scare, still convinced that one of my campers was going to jump scare me. I sloshed through some puddles and almost lost my footing, so I used the right wall of the corridor for support. I get to about the spot where I think the person is laying in wait and almost fall, because there is a doorway on the right side, and all my weight was basically thrown through it, since I was using the wall for support and guidance in the dark. Now I'm in the doorway for this massive chamber, still pitch black and musty, but I can tell it's huge just from the echoes. I get this insanely. I should not be here, feeling and bolt down the corridor to the end of the darkness and into the courtyard where the next 3 groups have assembled. I'm out of breath, shoes soaked, and my shirt dirty from rubbing on the walls. My other counselors are all looking at me like I'm nuts as I'm asking if any of the kids were in there. None of them were. They were all accounted for. They even told me that no one had gone in after my group, since they were there the whole time waiting for me to come get them. A minute later, one of the park rangers came through the tunnel, and I ran up to him to ask him if he or another ranger was in there, either to scare us kids or for safety purposes. He looks at me and instantly asks if I heard anything. I say no, but I am 100% sure I saw someone cross my path from that doorway that lead from that big-ass chamber room. He proceeds to tell me that for the most part, his crew avoids that hallway due to hearing the voice of the lady in black, and that none of his men were in there. So back through the darkness we go, though this time we have like 40 of our older, 11 to 13 years olds, kids running up and down the corridor hootin' and hollerin', trying scare everyone. One of them discovered the big chamber room, and soon they're all in there exploring. The rangers were explaining to the groups what the room and corridor's main purpose was during the Civil War, but I noped out of there fast as I could and rejoined my young campers on the other side. I have no idea what it was down in the darkness, but I'm deadly positive it was a woman's silhouette crossing my path in the depths of that awesome old fort. I've typed too long of a novel, but Google Fort Warren and the ghost of the lady in black shouldn't be too hard to find on there. 10 out of 10 would recommend going to George's Island. Camp Lejeune is one of those places that feels steeped in history, every inch of it saturated with the weight of generations of Marines who've passed through its gates. Located in North Carolina, it's a sprawling expanse of barracks, training grounds, and dense pine forests. It's the kind of place where every creak of wood, every rustle of leaves, seems to carry echoes of the past. I was stationed there for a couple of years during my time in the Corps, and while most of my memories from that period are the usual mix of camaraderie, drills, and late nights at the smoke pit, there's one incident that's burned into my brain. A night I still can't explain. I'd volunteered for armory duty that week, something I rarely did. It wasn't exactly glamorous, but it gave me a break from the usual grind. The armory at Camp Lejeune is a fortress within a fortress, a squat, concrete bunker of a building with thick steel doors and a state-of-the-art security system. Inside, rows of M4 carbines, M27 IRs, M9 sidearms, and other gear were meticulously cataloged and locked away. The armory was sacred ground, and the responsibility of guarding it wasn't taken lightly. The shift was uneventful for the most part. I'd done my usual checks, logging everything in the inventory system and making sure the weapons were secure. Around midnight, I settled into the small duty office near the entrance, the glow of the computer monitor casting long shadows across the walls. Outside, the wind howled through the pine trees, rattling the metal fences surrounding the building. It must have been close to 0200 when I first heard it, faint, almost imperceptible over the hum of the ventilation system. A low, rhythmic tapping. At first, I thought it was just the wind knocking a loose branch against the building, but the sound was too deliberate, too steady. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, my hand hovering over the keyboard. The armory was locked down tight. No one could get in without clearance, and I hadn't heard the distinct chime of the keypad at the main entrance. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the main hallway, the beam cutting through the dimly lit space. "Hello!" I called out, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. No response. The tapping stopped. I stood there for a moment, listening, my hand resting on the M9 holstered at my hip. The armory was supposed to be one of the safest places on base, but something about the silence felt wrong, like the air itself was holding its breath. I shook it off and did a quick sweep of the building, checking every corner, every shadow. The rows of weapon racks stood silent and undisturbed, the locks secure. Satisfied that everything was as it should be, I returned to the duty office, chalking the noise up to my imagination. But then it happened again. This time it was louder, more insistent. Tap, 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 followed by a faint scraping sound, like metal dragging against concrete. My stomach tightened as I turned toward the sound. It was coming from deeper within the armory, near the storage room where we kept old, decommissioned equipment that hadn't been sent to DRMO, Defense Reutilization and Marketing Office, yet. I moved cautiously, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The storage room door was slightly ajar, the heavy steel just barely cracked open. That wasn't right. I knew I'd locked it earlier. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice steady but my heart pounding in my chest. No answer. I drew my M9 and pushed the door open with my free hand, the hinges groaning in protest. The room was empty, its shelves lined with dusty crates and outdated gear. But as I stepped inside, the temperature seemed to drop, the air growing colder with each passing second. My breath fogged in front of me, and I could feel the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. That's when I saw it. Near the back of the room, in the shadows between two shelves, something moved. It wasn't a person, at least not entirely. It was tall, unnaturally so, its form shifting and flickering like a heat mirage. Its eyes, or what I assumed were its eyes, glowed faintly, a sickly yellow light that seemed to pierce through the darkness. I froze, my finger hovering over the trigger of my M9. I wanted to speak, to shout, to do something, but the words caught in my throat. The thing, whatever it was, just stood there watching me, its presence radiating an overwhelming sense of dread. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The temperature returned to normal, the room falling silent once again. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my weapon still drawn, my mind racing to process what I'd just seen. Finally, I forced myself to move, backing out of the storage room and locking the door behind me. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. I stayed in the duty office, my eyes glued to the security monitors, but nothing out of the ordinary appeared. By the time my relief arrived at 0600, I was exhausted, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. Who would believe me? A shadowy figure in the armory? It sounded ridiculous, like something out of a bad horror movie. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I'd encountered that night wasn't a figment of my imagination. Over the next few weeks, I started hearing rumors from other Marines stationed at Camp Lejeune. Stories about strange noises, shadowy figures, and inexplicable cold spots in certain parts of the base. One guy swore he'd seen a figure standing at the edge of the tree line during a late-night run, only for it to vanish when he tried to get a closer look. Another claimed to have heard footsteps following him during a patrol, though no one was there when he turned around. I was a PFC on a search patrol hunting. Charlie down it was in the jungle wars of 65, my weapon jammed, and I got stuck way out and all alone, and I could hear the enemy moving, in close outside. Just then I heard a twig snap, and I grabbed my empty gun, and I dug in scared while I counted down my fate, and then a big Marine, a giant with a pair of friendly eyes, appeared there at my shoulder and said, "Wait." When he came in close beside me, he said, "Don't worry, son, I'm here. If Charlie wants to tangle now, they'll have two to dodge." I said, "Well, thanks a lot." I told him my name and asked him his, and he said, "The boys just call me Camouflage." Whoa, Camouflage. Things are never quite the way they seem. Whoa, Camouflage. I was awfully glad to see this big Marine. Well, I was going to ask him where he came from when we heard the bullets fly coming through the brush and all around our ears, and then I saw that big Marine light a fire in his eye, and it was strange, but suddenly I forgot my fears. Well, we fought all night and side by side, we took our battle stance, and I wondered how the bullets missed this man, 'cause they seemed to go right through him just as if he wasn't there, and in the morning, we both took a chance and ran, and it was here the river bank when the ambush came on top of us, and I'd thought it was the end, and we were had then a bullet with my name on it came buzzing through a bush, and that big Marine, he just swat it with his hands, just like it was a fly. Whoa, Camouflage. Things are never quite the way they seem. Whoa, Camouflage. This was an awfully strange Marine. And I knew there was something weird about him, 'cause when I turned around he was pulling a big palm tree right up out of the ground and swatting those Charlies with it from here to Kingdom Come. When he led me out of danger, I saw my camp and waved goodbye, but he just winked at me from the jungle, and then was gone, and when I got back to my HQ I told them about my night, and the battle I'd spent with a big Marine named Camouflage. When I said his name, a soldier gulped, and the medic took my arm, and led me to a green tent on the right. He said, "You may be tellin' true, boy, but this here is Camouflage, and he's been right here since he passed away last night. In fact, he's been here all week long." But before he went he said Semper Fi and said his only wish was to save a young Marine caught in a barrage. So here, take his dog tag, son. I know, he'd want you to have it now. And we both said a prayer for a big Marine named Camouflage. Whoa, Camouflage. Things are never quite the way they seem. Whoa, Camouflage. This was an awfully big Marine. So next time you're in a jungle fight and you feel a presence near or hear a voice that in your mind will lodge, just be thankful that you're not alone and you've got some company from a big Marine the boys call Camouflage. Whoa, Camouflage. Things are never quite the way they seem. Whoa, Camouflage. This was an awfully big Marine. Whoa, Camouflage. Things are never quite the way they seem. Whoa, Camouflage. This was an awfully big Marine. Whoa, Camouflage. Whoa, Camouflage.